Hello students, my name is Arshan and today we are gonna do the 6th chapter, which is Towns, Traders and Craftsperson from your R Past 2nd textbook of history of NCERT for class 7th. So students, have you ever wondered that if you traveled in the past, what would you find in a medieval town? Well, to answer this question, it would totally depend on the type of town it was. For example, was it a temple town or a administrative center or a commercial town or maybe a port town? In fact, many towns combined several functions in medieval period. They were administrative centers, temple towns as well as centers of commercial activities and craft productions. So with this students, we are on to the first topic of our chapter, that is administrative centers. Now, we have read about the Chola dynasty in 2nd chapter. Let's travel in our imagination to Thanjavur, the capital of the Cholas, as it was 1000 years ago. The perennial river Kaveri flows near this beautiful town. One can hear the bells of the Rajarajeshwara temple built by the king Rajaraja Chola. The town people are all praised for its architect Kunjaramallan Rajaraja Parunthacchan, who has proudly carved his name on the temple wall. Now, inside the temple is a massive Shivling. Besides the temple, there are palaces with mandapas or pavilions. Kings hold court in these mandapas, issuing orders to their subordinates. There are also barracks for the army. The town is bustling with markets, selling grain, spices, clothes and jewelry. Water supply for the town comes from wells and tanks. The Salia weavers of Thanjavur and the nearby towns of Urayur are busy producing cloth for flags to be used in the temple festival, fine cottons for the king and nobility and coarse cotton for the masses. Some distance away at Swami Malai, the sthapatis or sculptors are making exquisite bronze idols and tall ornamental bell metal lamps. Interesting, isn't it? Now students, we have talked a lot about this Thanjavur, which is actually a temple town and a pilgrimage center. So, Thanjavur town is a classical example of a temple town. It represents a very important pattern of organization and urbanization, which is the process by which cities developed. Now, temples were often central to the economy and society. Rulers built temples to demonstrate their devotion to various deities. They also endowed temples with grants of land and money to carry out elaborate rituals, feed pilgrims and priests, and celebrate festivals. Now, pilgrims who are flocked to the temples also made donations. Since they are making donations, temple authorities used their wealth to finance trade and banking. Gradually, a large number of priests, workers, artisans, traders, etc. settled near the temple to cater to its need, and those of the pilgrims. Thus grew temple towns. So, towns emerged temples such as those of Bhilla Swamin or Bhilsa, which is in Vidisha in Madhya Pradesh, and Somnath, which is in Gujarat. Other important temple towns included Kanchipuram and Madurai in Tamil Nadu and Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh. Pilgrimage center also slowly developed into townships. For example, Vrindavan, which is in Uttar Pradesh, and Tiruvannamalai, which is in Tamil Nadu, are examples of two such towns. Ajmer, which is in Rajasthan, was the capital of the Chauhan kings in the 12th century and later became the Suba headquarters under the Mughals. It provides an excellent example of religious coexistence. Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti, the celebrated Sufi saint who settled there in the 12th century, attracted devotees from all creeds. Near Ajmer is a lake, Pushkar, which has attracted pilgrims from ancient times. Even today, people go to pilgrimage there. Now students, let me tell you about the bronze, bell metal and the lost wax technique. Well, bronze is an alloy containing copper and tin. Bell metal contains a greater proportion of tin than other kind of bronze. This produces a bell-like sound. So, Chola bronze statues were made using the lost wax technique. First, an image was made of wax. This was covered with clay and allowed to dry. Next to it was heated and a tiny hole was made. First, an image was made of wax. This was covered with clay and allowed to dry. Next, it was heated and a tiny hole was made in the clay cover. The molten wax was drained out through this hole. Then, molten metal was poured into the clay. So, once the metal cooled, the solidified clay cover was carefully removed and the image was cleaned and polished. So students, these were the same antiques that we see today in museums and in movies which are worth millions. So now moving on to the next topic, which is the network of small towns. From the 8th century onwards, the subcontinent was dotted with several small towns. These probably emerged from large villages. They usually had a mandapika, which is also called a mandi of later times, to which nearby villagers brought their produce to sell. They also had market streets called the hatta or haat, which we call even today, which were lined with shops. Besides, there were streets for different kinds of artisans such as potters, oil pressers, sugar markets, toddy markets, smiths, stonemasons, etc. While some traders lived in the towns, others travelled from town to town. Many came from far and near to these towns to buy local articles and sell products of distant places like horses, salt, camphor, saffron, betel nut and spices like pepper. Usually a samant, or in later times a zamidar, built a fortified palace in or near these towns. They levied taxes on traders, artisans and articles of trade and sometimes donated the right to collect these taxes to local temples, which had been built by themselves or by rich merchants. These rights were recorded in inscriptions that have survived to this day. So, with the students, we know that if the economy is blooming, there might have been traders which are big and small. So, on to the next topic, which is traders. There were many kinds of traders. These included the Banjaras. Several traders, especially horse traders, turned associations with headmen who negotiated on their behalf with warriors who bought horses. Since traders had to pass through many kingdoms and forests, they usually travelled in caravans and formed guilds to protect their interest. There were several such guilds in South India from the 8th century onwards, the most famous being the Maningramam and Nanadesi. These guilds traded extensively both within the peninsula and with Southeast Asia and China. There were also communities like the Chetiyars and Malwadi, Oswal, who went on to become the principal trading groups of the country. Gujarati traders, including the communities of Hindu Baniyas and Muslim Bohras, traded extensively with the ports of the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, East Africa, Southeast Asia and China. They sold textiles and spices in these ports and in exchange brought gold and ivory from Africa and spices, tin, Chinese blue pottery and silver from Southeast Asia and China. The towns on the west coast were home to Arab, Persian, Chinese, Jewish and Syrian Christian traders. Indian spices and cloth sold in the Red Sea ports were purchased by Italian traders and eventually reached European markets, fetching very high profits. Spices grown in tropical climates, that is like pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, dried ginger, etc., an important part of European cooking, and cotton cloth was very attractive. This eventually drew European traders to India. We will discuss about this shortly, how this changed the face of trading and towns. So with the students, I can give you the example of a city like Kabul, because Kabul with its rugged and mountainous landscape became politically and commercially important from the 16th century onwards. Kabul and Kandahar were linked to the celebrated Silk Route. Besides, trade in horses were primarily carried on through this route. In the 17th century, John Baptist Tavernier, a diamond merchant, estimated that the horse trade at Kabul amounted to rupees 30,000 annually. So 30,000 annually is not a big amount nowadays, but back in that time it was a huge sum. Camel carried dried fruits, dates, carpets, silks, and even fresh fruits from Kabul to the subcontinent and elsewhere. Slaves were also brought there for sales. So, with this much trade in the towns, we are at the topic of crafts in town. The craftsperson of Bidar were so famed for their inlay work in copper and silver that it came to be called Bidri. The Panchalas or the Vishwakarma community, consisting of goldsmiths, bronzesmiths, blacksmiths, masons, and carpenters, were essentially to the building of temples. They also played an important role in the construction of palaces, big buildings, tanks, and reservoirs. Similarly, weavers such as the Saliyar or Kaikolars emerged as prosperous communities, making donations to temples. Some aspects of cloth making like cotton cleaning, spinning, and dyeing became specialized and independent crafts as well. So students, these craftsmen flourished in the towns, and with this the towns flourished, but we also have an example of the changing fortunes of towns. For example, some towns like Ahmedabad, which is in Gujarat and it is present even today, went on to become the major commercial cities, but other like Thanjavur shrank in size and importance over the centuries. We can also take the example of Murshidabad, which is in West Bengal on the banks of Bhagirath, which rose to prominence as a center for silk and became the capital of Bengal in 1704. Declined in the course of the century as the weavers faced competitions from cheap mill-made cloth from England. So, with this, the destiny of towns changed. Now, moving forward into our chapter, we are at the topic of Hampi, Masulipatnam and Surat and their importance. So students, the architectural splendor of Hampi, let us discuss that. Now, Hampi is located in the Krishna Tungabhadra basin, which formed the nucleus of the Vijayanagar Empire, which is founded in 1336. The magnificent ruins at Hampi reveals a well-fortified city. No mortar or cementing agent was used in the construction of those walls, and the technique followed was to wedge them together by interlocking. The architecture of Hampi was distinctive. The buildings in the royal complex had splendid arches, domes, and pillared halls with niches for holding sculptures. They also had well-planned orchards and pleasure gardens with sculptural motifs such as the lotus and cowbells. In its heyday in the 15th to 16th century, Hampi bustled with commercial and cultural activities. Muslim merchants, chetis, and agents of European traders such as the Portuguese thronged the markets of Hampi. Now, temples were the hub of cultural activities, and Devdasis, that is the temple dancers, performed before the deity, royalty, and masses in the many pillared halls in the Virupaksha temple. The Mahanavami festival, known today as Navratri in the south, was one of the most important festivals celebrated at Hampi. Archaeologists have found the Mahanavami platform where the king received guests and accepted tributes from subordinate chiefs. From there, he also used to watch dance and music performance as well as wrestling bouts. Hampi fell into ruin following the defeat of Vijayanagar in 1565 by the Deccani Sultans, the rulers of Golconda, Bijapur, Ahmednagar, Berar and Bidar. So, interesting, isn't it students? What a sight it would have been. Now, moving on to the next topic, which is a gateway to the west, that is Surat. Now, Surat is a city in Gujarat that is present today also. Back in the day, it was the emporium of western trade during the Mughal period, along with Cambay, which is present-day Khambat, and somewhat later Ahmedabad also. Surat was the gateway for trade with West Asia via the Gulf of Ormuz. Surat has also been called the gate to Makkah because many pilgrims' ships set sail from there. The city was cosmopolitan and people of all castes and creeds lived there. In the 17th century, the Portuguese, Dutch and English had their factories and warehouses at Surat. According to the English chronicler Ovington, who wrote an account of the port in 1689, almost 400 years back, he wrote that on average 100 ships of different countries could be found anchored at the port at any given time. So students, just imagine what a sight, almost 100 ships at the port in that time. There were also several retail and wholesale shops selling cotton textiles. The textiles of Surat were famous for their gold lace borders, that is the zari, and had a market in West Asia, Africa and Europe. The state built numerous rest houses to take care of the needs of people from all over the world who came to the city. There were magnificent buildings and innumerable pleasure parks. The Kathiwar Seths or Mahajans, that is the money changers, had huge banking houses at Surat. Now it is noteworthy, students, that the Surat Hundis were honored in the far-off markets of Cairo in Egypt, Basra in Iraq and Antwerp in Belgium also. However, Surat began to decline towards the end of the 17th century. This was because of many factors: the loss of markets and productivity because of the decline of the Mughal Empire, and also the control of the sea routes by the Portuguese and competition from Bombay, which is present-day Mumbai, where in Mumbai the English East India Company has shifted its headquarters in 1668. Today Surat is a bustling commercial center, but back in the day, in the 17th century, it was almost declining. Now on to our third city, which is Masulipatam. So let us take this topic in hand, which is fishing in troubled waters. So students, the town of Masulipatam or Machilipatnam literally means fish port town. Now it lays on the delta of Krishna River. In the 17th century, it was a center of intense activity. Both the Dutch and English East India Companies attempted to control Masulipatam, as it became the most important port on the Andhra coast. The fort at Masulipatam was built by the Dutch. Now, the Qutub Shahi rulers of Golconda imposed royal monopolies on the sale of textiles, spices and other items to prevent the trade passing completely into the hands of the various East India Companies. Fierce competition among various trading groups, the Golconda nobles, the Persian merchants, Telugu, Komati, Chettis and European traders made the city populous and prosperous. As the Mughals began to extend their power to Golconda, their representative, the governor Mir Jumla, who was also a merchant, began to play off the Dutch and the English against each other. In 1686 and 1687, Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb annexed Golconda. This caused the European companies to look for alternatives. It was a part of the new policy of the English East India Company that it was not enough if a port had connections with the production centers of the hinterland. The new company trade centers, it was felt, should combine political, administrative and commercial roles. As the company traders moved to Bombay, Calcutta, present-day Kolkata and Madras, which is present-day Chennai, Masulipatam lost both its merchants and prosperity and declined in the course of the 18th century, being today nothing more than a dilapidated little town. So, students, with this we are on to the topic of new towns and traders. So, in the 16th and 17th centuries, European countries were searching for spices and textiles, which had become popular both in Europe and West Asia. The English, Dutch and French formed East India Companies in order to expand their commercial activities in the East. Initially, great Indian traders like Mullah Abdul Ghaffur and Veerji Vora, who owned a large number of ships, competed with them. However, the European companies used their naval power to gain control of the sea trade and forced Indian traders to work as their agents. Ultimately, the English emerged as the most successful commercial and political power in the subcontinent. The spurt in demands for goods like textiles led to a great expansion of the crafts of spinning, weaving, bleaching, dyeing, etc. With taking them up, Indian textile designs became increasingly refined. However, students, this period also saw the decline of the independence of craftspersons. They now began to work on a system of advances, which meant that they had to weave cloth which was already promised to European agents. Weavers no longer had the liberty of selling their own cloth or weaving their own patterns. They had to reproduce the designs supplied to them by the company agents. The 18th century saw the rise of Bombay, Calcutta and Madras, which are nodal cities today. Crafts and commerce underwent major changes as merchants and artisans, such as weavers, were moved into the black towns established by the European companies within these new cities. The blacks or native traders and craftspersons were confined here, while the white rulers occupied the superior residences of Fort St. George in Madras or Fort St. William in Calcutta. The story of crafts and commerce in the 18th century will be taken up next year, students. So, this was happening in the Indian subcontinent, but elsewhere in the world, students, there was a great explorer named Vasco da Gama, and also his contemporary, that was Christopher Columbus. Now in the 15th century, European sailors undertook unprecedented exploration of sea routes. They were driven by the desire to find ways of reaching the Indian subcontinent and obtaining spices. Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese sailor, sailed down the African coast, went round the Cape of Good Hope and crossed over to the Indian Ocean. His first journey took more than a year. He reached Calicut in 1498 and returned to Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, the following year. He lost 2 of his 4 ships, and of the 170 men at the start of the journey, only 54 survived. In spite of the obvious hazards, the routes that were opened up proved to be extremely profitable, and he was followed by English, Dutch and French sailors as well. So the search for sea routes to India had another unexpected fallout, students. On the assumption that Earth was round, Christopher Columbus, an Italian, decided to sail westwards across the Atlantic Ocean to find a route to India, and he landed in the West Indies, which got their name because of this confusion. They thought that they are India, but it was someplace else, and then they named it India of the West, that is West Indies, in 1492. So he was followed by sailors and conquerors from Spain and Portugal, who occupied large parts of Central and South America, often destroying earlier settlements in the area. With the students, we are at the end of this chapter, and it's time for a quick summary. So students, in this chapter, we have learned about the towns, traders and craftsperson. We have seen that in the medieval period, towns were of different types like administrative centers, temple towns and pilgrimage centers, etc. etc. We have also seen that in that time there was a network of small towns which also contained traders which were big and small, and the craftsmen were also present in the town. We have seen their situation, their rise and their falls also. With the students, we have also taken a closer look at the architectural splendor of Hampi, and we have also learned about the city of Surat, that how it rose to prominence and then the fall of Surat. Also, we have learned about the Masulipatanam and why was it so important at a certain period of time and then it lost its importance. Also, we have learned about the rise of new towns and traders and the rise of East India Company and their contemporaries like the Dutch and the Portuguese. So students, let us do the exercise part. Now, on to the first question, which is fill in the blanks. A. The Raja Rajeshwara temple was built in early 11th century. B. Ajmer is associated with the Sufi saint Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti. C. Hampi was the capital of Vijayanagar. And D. The Dutch established a settlement at Masulipatanam in Andhra Pradesh. With this students, let us go on to the second question, which is state whether true or false. A. We know the name of the architect of the Raja Rajeshwara temple from an inscription. Well student, this is true. B. Merchants preferred to travel individually rather than in caravans. This is false. C. Kabul was a major center for trade in elephants. This is false also students. We know it was horse. Now D. Surat was an important trading port on the Bay of Bengal. This is false as well student. Moving on to the third question, which is how was water supplied to the city of Thanjavur? So student, to answer it, water supply for the city of Thanjavur came from wells and tanks. Now, the fourth question. Who lived in the black towns in cities such as Madras? The answer is merchants, artisans such as weavers, native traders and craft persons lived in the black towns. Now the fifth question. Why do you think towns grew around temples? To answer this, students, the following factors are responsible for the growth of towns around temples. A large number of priests, workers, artisans, traders, etc. settled near the temple. And B, they catered to the various needs of the people as well as of pilgrims who flocked to the temples. By and by, towns grew, which came to be known as temple towns. Now it's time for the sixth question. How important were craft persons for the building and maintenance of temples? To answer it, students, craft persons played an important role in the building and maintenance of temples. First, the Vishwakarma community consists of goldsmiths, bronzesmiths, blacksmiths, masons and carpenters, which were essential to the building of temples. Second, weavers such as the Saliyar or Kaikolars were prosperous communities and they made ample donation to the temples. Third, the craft persons of Bidar were skilled in their inlay work in copper and silver. They were also important for the building and maintenance of temples in their own. Now it's time for the seventh question. Why did people from distant lands visit Surat? To answer it, students, people from distant lands visited Surat because of the following reasons. First, Surat was the gateway for trade with West Asia via the Gulf of Ormuz. Second, Surat has also been called the gate to Mecca because many pilgrims' ships set sail from there. Third, there was a big market for cotton textiles. One could find several retail and wholesale shops selling cotton textiles. Fourth, the textiles of Surat were famous for their gold lace borders, that is zari, and had a market in West Asia, Africa and Europe. Fifth, there were ample rest houses for the visitors. Magnificent buildings and innumerable pleasure parks attracted people of far-off places. Now, moving on to the eighth question, which is, in what ways was craft production in cities like Calcutta different from that in cities like Thanjavur? So, the answer can be, students, that the craft production in Thanjavur was in form of inlay work in copper and silver white in Calcutta. It was in the form of cotton textiles, jute textiles and silk textiles. Now, the last question. Compare any one of the cities described in this chapter with a town or a village with which you are familiar. Do you notice any similarities or differences? Well, students, this is a task for you people to do at home because you may be belonging to any of the cities in our country. So, I hope that the next time when you hear the name of these cities like Madras, Kolkata, Bombay, Machilipatnam, Hampi, etc., you can recall all these things and you can recall their glorious past and their fall as well. So, we will meet next time with some other interesting topic. Till then, bye-bye.